Hey folks, Steve here with another World in Flames video. As usual, I always have to do this when I record videos. I have to apologize for the lapse in recording. I was rolling hot, recording pretty well there for a little bit, and then life and work just have gotten so busy. You know, I'd get to the end of my workday and basically be exhausted mentally, and I could not bring myself to play any World in Flames, which is a bummer, right? Because the intent, the desire is there, but the energy to do it simply was not. And I just couldn't fit in the time, unfortunately, for the last now almost 2 weeks. Which really sucks, because I know we got to a really great place, and we conquered Poland, or we're conquering Poland, and we're ready to move on. We just couldn't quite get any further in that time. So sorry for that, and hopefully this video will begin to rectify things, or at least I'll be able to do a little bit more. Now this video is going to be probably not as sexy as the last couple of videos, because the last couple of videos were, hey, the start of the action, invasion of Poland, all these things, activities, ships, all this stuff. This video is going to be focused on the end turn phase, and I'm probably not going to do the end turn phase as a whole video in the future. Probably, you know, as I go through this and I get to the end of a turn, I'm just going to process it, and I'll tell you guys kind of how it all played out afterwards, so that it's easy for you guys to just, you know, see what's going on and we move on. But as we encounter new mechanics, I want to make sure that I'm taking the time to explain and show those mechanics as we go. And so we will take a lot of time to get through the entire end of turn stage sequence, so that you guys understand how it works and the things that we would want to be considering along the way. And so this will take some time, so this video may be long. I apologize for that. I might even end up having to split it across multiple videos, because we will get to the production phase, and that may take some time to work through. So bear with me. If you're a new player and you've not gone through the end turn stage before, you know, this would be good to watch and understand. If you're a veteran player, you might even be able to skip some of this video unless you really care about the commentary, but we will be talking about long-term strategy, so if you're interested in that part of the discussion as we go, then stick around and watch through. A couple of things to address from the last video that now, 2 weeks later, I have to talk about. There was a whole question about up here in the North Sea, could the British fleet that chose to return to base as a naval move, could it be intercepted? Well, because it was not entering a new sea area, it could not be intercepted. So just going home, it could do without danger of the Germans catching them. So one thing kind of didn't, you know, it didn't matter, but one thing we should have played that way. I asked the great gurus on Board Game Geek, you know, even, hey, it seems like I'm good at this game, right? I'm really not. I still have questions, or I second guess myself sometimes, or I think too hard about something, and I end up needing to ask because I'm just paranoid I'm going to get it wrong. One of the other things I sort of had floating around in my head was I had this question around Oslo and whether or not you could actually invade Oslo. And my concern was because Oslo doesn't have an all-sea hex side. You know, I thought Oslo didn't have an all-sea hex side because all it has are coasts up there in the bay, you know, whatever you want to call it. And so I asked that question online as well, and just got, and I knew the answer. I knew it, and I second-guessed myself, and I was worried maybe I was getting it wrong. You can invade Oslo directly because it does have an all-sea hex side, that one sort of facing southwest. And it doesn't matter that it's also a coast hex. That does not matter. That light-colored blue is still blue of the sea zone, and so you can invade Oslo directly. Now, it probably matters less now because of our intended strategic direction, but something to keep in mind. At the end of the last video, I called for a vote on what we were going to address as our grand strategy. And I didn't get a huge number of votes. I think some folks, you know, were just asking questions about the game and didn't want to speak to one direction or the other. I ended up getting, let me double check this, 6 votes total. 1 vote for the standard strategy of, you know, we'd invade Norway, we'd invade Soviet Union in 1941, and that got 1 vote. Apparently, and I got 2 votes for closing the Med, so that would involve going into France, and then likely having to go into Spain and working to close the Mediterranean. And then we'd be looking at like a 42 Barbarossa, something like that. I got 2 votes for that. And then I got 3 votes for Sea Lion. And so, I guess I have a vote myself, and I could create a tie to close the Med strategy. Or I could ultimately just do whatever the heck I want. But I did ask the question because I wanted to see, make this a little more interactive than just solitaire, right? What does the German High Command think here? And it looks like Sea Lion's winning out, so I will tentatively pursue a Sea Lion strategy from here with a lot of concern over how well that's all going to turn out in the end. There's a lot of ways that could go and be a disaster. But hey, that's the fun, right, is to try out different things. The game allows for it, so let's give it a shot, right? So we will begin to steer our production and our planning for Sea Lion as the axis. That will be the desire, with the idea that even if we don't fully conquer Britain, the United Kingdom, if we can get into London, at least, which is, that's going to be something important that we try to do anyway, we can align Norway, and for now, we're going to get trade from Norway anyway. So, all things considered from that perspective, I mean, it's pretty good. It's not bad. It might even force the Commonwealth to have to decide, do they try to invade Norway themselves just to slow things down? But I don't think they have the U.S. entry slack to do it. So, yeah, so we'll look to do that. And the nice thing is, even if we decide to change our mind, if folks in the comment section down below all of a sudden come back and say, no, don't do Sea Lion, don't do Sea Lion, we have time to decide. And even if we start building towards a Sea Lion, any of those things that we build, if we don't use them for Sea Lion, is okay. We can use those units, even if they're amphibious landing craft, we can use those for other things. They can still be useful even if we end up using them for something else, like an invasion of Egypt, or maybe some naval landings on Russia, or whatever, right? There are options, so we don't have to be set in stone for Sea Lion if we decide to change our minds, but it's a lot easier to start going down Sea Lion and change your mind out of it than to decide late to do Sea Lion, because you usually really can't do that. You've produced things that won't help you get across the channel. So we will look at that as we get to the production phase. Final thing, someone had commented that I might have moved my units in Poland a little too far with the stormy weather, with the terrain cost being doubled. I was trying to look at that to see if I actually did, and I probably did. So like this guy's probably here, this guy's probably here, so there's, I don't know, it's like a couple of units would be 1 hex behind where they were. This ultimately doesn't really matter a whole lot because we're going to have plenty of time to rearrange the units. So yeah, not really a big deal. And probably the only other thing that we want to be thinking about is, before we get into things, is if we're not going to invade Norway, that's one thing. Do we invade Denmark? Because again, Denmark's going to be an easy grab. We probably still want to grab Denmark just to ensure that we have all the major areas for entry into the Baltic under our supervision. So I will probably do that when the weather allows in 1940. So we'll probably still take Denmark, but we'll leave Norway alone as we prepare to align them by invasion of the Commonwealth, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, I guess, and solve our Norwegian mining problem that way, at least. We'll see what happens. So, okay, let's start looking at the end of turn stage, and it has multiple phases like most of the other steps of the game. And so you can see here on the sequence of play, end of turn stage. So we're going to do Partisans, U.S. entry, return to base, final reorganization, production. We're not playing with intelligence, so we don't need to worry about that. And then the peace phase, which we'll do it's sort of like political cleanup, right? We will officially remove Polish units, and like Poland will be conquered as of the peace phase. And then down here, we're not going to do any of that because we're not playing with those options, other than a victory check, which is superfluous. because there's nothing to really look at there. So main things: partisans, U.S. entry, return to base, final reorg, production, and then the peace phase. Pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, so to do the partisans step, now you could read the whole section of the rules, and if you're a new player, I advise that you do so you understand. This is just every turn, there's a chance that partisans will crop up somewhere along the game board, and it's interesting, like all systems in World and Flames, there's some nuance and some interesting things that aren't just, willy-nilly. There's some interesting pieces of the puzzle here. And to conduct this, we're going to go ahead and grab our handy-dandy player aid charts, and we're going to look at the top right corner of the one side here. There's a whole chart for the partisan table. Now, basically, what we're going to do is we're going to roll a d10, and then we're going to look for partisans across the row that we rolled. So if we roll a 5, we'll look all along this row. If it's a 10, down here, and so on. Basically, the colors denote that partisans will potentially arrive in that country or region that would be against an aggressor or a conqueror. And so, as an example, if we rolled a 10 and we had Norway, if the Germans had invaded Norway and were in Norway or what have you, there's a chance that partisans that would fight the Germans would rise up in Norway. Green basically being a signifier of just saying, like, these partisans are loyal to the original country that they're popping up in, right? You can imagine there's entries on here for France and the UK and all these other countries, right? Pretty straightforward. There are also red boxes here. And red boxes are really interesting because if you read here, it says affects controller or the conqueror. So not just the aggressor or conqueror, but the controller and conqueror. And if you look at what kind of countries are here, you can see Manchukuo, India, Indochina, Korea, Malaya, Africa, Dutch East Indies, Netherlands East Indies, Burma, Africa again. What this represents is partisans who are going to crop up in countries that, while they're controlled by some power, those partisans don't necessarily want to support the existing regime. So in India, for instance, those partisans would be, and I'm not going to get the right names of the political groups in India, but that's sort of that shades of Gandhi there, right? Of independence movements or rebellion against the British Raj. And so it's not just if you look at it, you're like, oh well, these great, these partisans are going to help the good guys, right, against the Germans. Well, it could be their partisans that are fighting the colonial powers in Asia, for instance, and that's something to be concerned about. So basically the way that this will work is if that region is present on your roll, you look again, you check, da-da-da-da-da. Some of the time, there's not going to be any chance of partisans. It's just not relevant, so okay, fair enough, good to go. But if there is a case where a partisan can exist, what you're going to examine are the resistance icons for the country. So I'm going to zoom in here for a second and show West Germany, and it shows there a fist and a 10. That is going to be the base die roll related to if a partisan will come up. So for every 10, you will get one. For any less than 10, you're going to roll a die. If that die roll is less than or equal to the number, then you'll have a partisan. Now, that is modified by how many units are there. So just as an example, you have the Netherlands. So let's say the Netherlands is possible. And it is on the chart. They have that little fist icon of a 2. So base value of 2. There's a 20% chance a partisan could come up. However, if there are German units there, that will decrease that resistance value. It's in terms of garrison. So there's a chart in the book that talks about garrison values. And I think that chart is somewhere, maybe it's on the Pacific map. I'm not sure. It might only be in the rule book. There is a garrison chart. So basically the more units you have in the country will basically make it so it's impossible for partisans to rise up. You're properly garrisoning it with forces of, conquerors putting forces there to keep the rebels from coming up. And then, assuming that there actually will be partisans that will arrive, they are going to be placed in a hex in that country as long as it's not in the zone of control of a conqueror's unit. So, in a little compressed place like the Netherlands, it might be really hard for partisans to come up. But if you're playing the game and you're playing in the Pacific, for instance, Chinese partisans are a major nuisance. And they're very difficult to deal with because there's a decent chance that they're going to come up on the chart. The red fist icon for China is relatively high, or quite high, so it's very likely that you're going to get some chance of rolling the die and getting a partisan, and it is very difficult, depending on what you're building and how you're putting your forces, it's difficult to keep all the hexes in China covered by Japanese zones of control to keep them from coming up. And so that's definitely an element of the Pacific theater that as Japan you need to worry about. Here it's a little more straightforward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll the die, and we're going to see what we get here. So I'm just going to roll it right there. I rolled a 4. So we look at the 4, say Norway. Nope, nothing's going on in Norway. Spain, nothing happening there. Nothing happening in South Africa. No issues in South Africa. Turkey, no. Netherlands, no. Siberia, no. South America, no. Korea would, but we're not playing with the Pacific map, and then there's China. So in this instance, there is no relevant partisans that will come up, so we're done with that step. See, it's just that easy. A lot of the time, there won't be much there. It's as a check, but it can sometimes be really problematic. Now, we could have potentially rolled something like, I gotta remember if Poland's on this chart or not. I don't see it, and I won't really worry about it too much. But basically, again, there's always that chance that something will come up, and in an area that you're not properly garrisoning or you've left exposed a little bit, and those partisans can just be a real pain in the butt. So yeah, there you go. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's look at U.S. entry. So there's kind of two different parts to U.S. entry, the step during the turn. One is that neutral powers, powers that have a neutrality pact, that's the key point, will be able to draw chits and allocate them. So the idea here is, and this is why I said, it's weird that the U.S. entry markers have American flag on them because they're used for more than just American stuff. The Germans will have some, and we'll see that in just a second. The idea here is that it is governing how long a neutrality pact can stay in effect. Now, you can establish neutrality pacts, basically, but for the most part, they're really going to center around a couple of things. One is the agreement between Germany and the Soviet Union. So that neutrality pact is in place. The rules tell us when it was in effect. So that one is in by default. If you're playing a full game, including Europe and Pacific, another situation that you'll see is the Soviet Union and Japan coming to some agreement if they're going to want to do a neutrality pact. They don't have to, and you can see Russia and Japan at war with each other in an early game if the players decide they really want to do that. But sometimes, they'll say, the Japanese player will go to the Soviet Union player and say, hey, I don't want to deal with Vladivostok, I don't want to deal with you, I want to focus on China. Let's just sign a neutrality pact. And what that kind of does, and you can sometimes get into that, again, multipolar, who's doing what and what are the odds or what's the benefits. For instance, if Japan doesn't do that, and they maintain a stout defense of Manchuria, then the Soviet Union has to worry about Japan coming and attacking them in the rear. And so they have to have, some decision-making of, do they want to put guys there to defend the Eastern Soviet Union? Do they want to invade Japan? And so that is a different thing. But if the Japanese player says, hey, just give me a neutrality pact, I don't want to fight you, that kind of provides the Russians a little more leeway to focus on the Western Front with the Germans. And the German player might go, hey, Japanese player, why'd you do that? And I don't, all that really can change and depend on who you're playing with. But right now, it doesn't really matter because the only stuff we care about is Europe. And so there's only one set of neutrality pact nonsense to worry about here, and that is, again, between Germany and Russia. So, in this step, major powers with neutrality pacts and have a common border may pick an entry marker with the initiative choosing first entry markers, either increase your offensive garrison values or your defensive garrison values. So what does that mean? And I'm reading from the rulebook, by the way. So, to break a neutrality pact, you have to have a certain ratio of forces on the border with the opposite country. So you can't just break it willy-nilly. You do have to have a buildup of forces on the border and have a certain ratio of garrison value to be able to declare war. Now you can do that by concentrating forces, but the other part of that calculation is U.S. entry markers. So instead of being in the pool of the U.S. entry markers, as we looked at with the Americans, these markers are kind of put on the common border with the opposing faction, and so basically each side's going to have to decide, did they want to put points there in defense to delay a declaration of war on them, or will they put it on offense, I'm putting it German for that reason, put it on the offensive side in terms of building up the ability to declare war. And it is a little bit of posturing. If you see that your opponent is doing everything they can to put offensive values on your border, you're like, hey, you're going to declare war on me eventually, aren't you? Or they're putting a lot of defensive markers there because they want to delay you declaring war on them as much as possible, either because they need time to prepare or whatever, right? So how's this going to work? Well, for Germany, by special rule, they get to pick 2 markers, which is a benefit. The Soviet Union, by comparison, will pick only 1. And we go in initiative order, so technically the Germans will get to go first. They'll get to decide what to do with their markers. So I'm going to go to the cup. So I've transferred the 39 markers to a cup here. And the Germans are going to pick 2, and they're going to decide where they're going to put them. And they're going to have to decide, do they want to do offensive or defensive? Now, this is actually a decision that matters for our strategy of sea line, believe it or not. And here's why. So if we're going to do sea line, we basically don't want to have to go to war with Russia, right? If we go to war with Russia, that's a distraction. We want to be able to knock out the Commonwealth to such a degree that we conquered Great Britain at least. And maybe Belfast, complete the conquering of the Commonwealth, the United Kingdom, not the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth will still fight on. But if we can knock out the United Kingdom, that helps a lot. Then we could move forces back to the Eastern Front and kind of have a stable position there. But for a while, we don't want to deal with that. So what is our solution? Well, we can put some of these chits that I just drew as Germany onto the border as defensive garrison points and say, I'm putting this down as defensive, right? I want to delay war with the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union could, if they put their forces on the border and saved up their points, they could opt and say, I'm going to declare war on Germany. Now, it takes time for them to be able to do that, but it is something they could try, and the Germans need to kind of play this will we, won't we, invasion of the Soviet Union thing until the Allies realize what the grand strategy is of the Axis. So, what are we going to do? Well, I drew a 4 and a 2. So Germans got to draw 2. I drew a 4 and a 2. Now, if we decide to put it, we have to decide if they're going to be defensive or offensive. If it's offensive, we're going to put it face down so nobody knows what the value is. If you place it in a defensive position, then the number is going to be face up. So, what do we want to do? Well, with a 4 and a 2, right, what are we going to show to my Soviet Union self? If we make the 4 defensive, which is better, that might indicate, like, hey, if we're putting 4 points in defense, that's signaling something, right? That's a fair bit. If we do it with a 2, we might just be splitting the difference. So we're going to, again, this is like that, I can't play myself. I can't trick myself. But if we're going to play this is what I might do. I say, well, if I'm getting 2, I'm gonna divide, and I'm gonna just say, without showing my hand, because showing a 4 on defense might be too indicative. I'm gonna put a 2 on defense, and I'm gonna put a 1. I'm gonna put this 4 down as offensive, but nobody but the German player technically knows what that is. So what is this telling the Russian player? It says, hey, I'm putting some points down, and for all you know, I'm just hedging my bets, right? I put some defense down because I want to decide when we go to war on my terms, and I'm going to put something down on offense because, yeah, I probably am going to invade the Soviet Union, right? So what am I doing here? And it is true, I'm putting the higher value chit on offense, but I don't really mean to do it that way, but I don't want to give up the ghost just yet. I want to try to delay the Soviet Union so they're not quite sure what I'm doing. Now, this might be silly for me to do. I'm just trying to illustrate why you might choose one way or the other. So don't think too hard about if what I'm doing is a good decision. What I want to illustrate is why you're doing one thing versus the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put this in Prussia because our new border with the Soviet Union is along the East Poland conquering line, or it will be. So we will have it so like that. Relatively simple, I think. I'm pretty sure I did that right. Now, when I play with my buddies, we tend to put these pools off map a little bit so they're not cluttering up the map. So, that might be something I change later, but for now, I'll just plop them up there. So 4 on offense, but face down. No one knows but the Germans. 2 face up, being defensive. And that's all we need to do as Germany. So pretty straightforward stuff there. And then we're going to have the Soviet Union pick one, right? So Soviet Union picks one. What did they get? They got a 4. Okay, so well, the Soviet Union definitely, again, doesn't know what the Germans did, but probably doesn't want a invasion too early, and so they'll probably put theirs face up and say, like, okay, I'm just going to set it over here so it's easy to differentiate. 4 face up, 4 defense for the Soviet Union. And this is important because right now the common border is very empty. The Soviet Union doesn't have much on that border, and there's certainly an incentive there. If they stayed up here too long messing around with Finland or down here in Romania too much, that it's going to open up a door for a 1940 Barbarossa. Now, it's not what the Axis is going to do, but the Soviet Union doesn't know that. So they're going to try to put some stuff over there just to make sure that the ratio stays appropriate. Now, if you were looking at the rulebook and you wanted to really understand, like, hey, how does this really work? Let's see if I can find in the index, because the index is really great. We want to look at garrison value. Garrison value 9.2. So towards the front of the rulebook, you can actually get the readout here of what matters. So you can see here's the chart. So you have the U.S. entry markers are worth a certain amount of value, and then you also have units. So units are worth a certain amount. Pretty straightforward from that perspective. So you just so you understand the garrison ratio and why it matters. You may break a neutrality pact starting 3 full turns after its signing, provided you have a modified garrison value on your common border at least double that of your opponent. So what you do is you work out your unit's total garrison value, you add your offensive marker total to it if you're the one declaring war, and you work out the opponents and their defensive value, and you compare the total to your other major powers total, and if you're at least double that, then boom, you can break the pact, right? Okay. So just as an illustrative example, we would need, as the Germans right now, as of this activity, if there's 4 on the common border right now with the Axis, and right now that would be what it is until we take some of these other territories and move units down. It would just be a 4, which is not great. And in terms of what we have on offense, we have 4 from U.S. entry, and then if you were to look at some of these units over here, technically you could probably add it all up. We probably could break the neutrality pact if we wanted to. It's everything within on the common border. Oh yeah. Yeah. Within 3 hexes of the border. So it would be, for this was our border now, right? Or it will be, or it is, they've conquered it, say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So yeah, we would be we probably have 8 to 4. Probably. Now the Soviet Union doesn't know that, but they might guess, and so there is some risk here, right? Now the funny thing is, would it make sense for the Germans to attack in 1940? Not with the way our current setup is. So I won't dwell on this anymore, but just so you can start to see, you can choose some ahistorical options. You can certainly choose to go a certain path. You could do Poland and try to do a 1940 Barbarossa. Now, you can't do a 1939 because it hasn't been 3 full turns since the pact was signed. So the Nazi-Soviet pact was signed in July, August 1939. It hasn't been 3 full turns. So we wouldn't be able to actually do this even if we wanted to until the very beginning of 1940, which we're not going to bother to do that, right? But just so you understand the mechanics, that's how all that works. Now, we also have the Americans get to pick, right? Now, the way, if we looked at our special rules, right, this is the special scenario that we're playing, the U.S. is only going to get to pick one every other turn. Basically, they can't pick one if the last turn they picked one, right? So it's every other. I'm not sure why they explained it that way, but there you go. So the U.S. is going to pick one, but they won't, pick one for free, but they won't be able to do that next turn. So they're hoping for a high number here. And they got a 3. That's pretty good. And because we count double, this is actually worth 6. So this goes into the German-Italian force pool. And there we go. So that phase of U.S. entry is complete. And we'll go on to the next part of U.S. entry. There is a second part. So that's the first part, easy stuff, right? Folks are pulling their chits. You look at the neutrality pacts, whatever, and then we'll do the next part. Okay, so the other section of U.S. entry is really the more interesting one if you're the American player. It is where, if we have stuff over in this pool, which is the important piece, way over here, if you have the right value of chits, you can take different actions. And these represent political and production-based decisions that allow the United States to get more involved politically, diplomatically, militarily in the war in Europe and the Pacific, respectively. Now, the game splits the entry pool into a German-Italy pool and a Japan pool, so basically European theater, Pacific theater, respectively. And they have also tension pools. So we won't worry too much about the difference between entry and tension, just that if you look at the chart for U.S. declaration of war, which is in the player aid charts, I've recorded so good for so long, and now my camera's screwing up. So its war chart governs if you can declare war on the axis. So U.S. entry, one for the German Italy, and then a tension pool for Germany, Italy, and same for Japan. And if you're going to declare war on those folks in the particular theater as the U.S., if you're not have war declared upon you yourself, you need a certain amount of U.S. entry and you need a certain amount of tension. And you can see it's sort of an interesting relationship. You certainly need some tension to declare war, but if you have too much, it may be harder in some cases to declare war. And it's not really a linear chart. It's kind of interesting if you were to really try to analyze the numbers here. But the basic idea is you need entry. Over time, you'll get tension. And at some point, it's going to govern wherever you're at on this chart how easy it is for you to declare war on the Axis power that you're looking at. So something to just take a look at and know that that's how that works eventually. But in the early phase of the game, the U.S. entry, what really matters is that you take these particular actions. Again, this will impact your ability to get involved in the war as the United States, politically, diplomatically, and militarily. Here's the key thing that you need to know about U.S. entry. Until certain U.S. entry options are taken, the United States can't build whatever it wants like other powers. It is severely restricted in what it can build. And if you were to go in your rulebook to page 42, or depending on the PDF, some other number, they have them all listed out. And the thing is, you wouldn't know about these restrictions unless you read all of these. And I do suggest that you do, if you're an American player, to understand what you can and cannot do. That sounds like a real pain in the butt. I've created a chart for Fatal Alliances, which is the World War I version of World in Flames, that kind of lists out how you get access to different build options. I haven't really done quite the same job for World in Flames. I probably should. But what you really need to keep in mind is, like, you just can't build most stuff. So here's an example. There is the number 12 option called the Selective Service Act, right? We know what that is. That's the draft. Or the act that allows men to be drafted. So it says, until you choose this option, the only land unit you may start building each turn is one infantry or cavalry class unit. From now on, you may start building up to 2 infantry class units or 1 other land unit per turn. There is no restriction on the number or class of units you may build while active. So basically this is saying, like, you can't be building up a huge amount of land forces at the beginning of the game as the U.S. with any of your build points. You really can only build certain types of things. As I'm looking, what are some of these other things that you can do? Gosh, there really is a whole lot, guys, and I don't think I could just cover it easily in one video or even multiple videos. It's just something that you have to take a look at and understand how to get from point A to point B. Now, the thing about it, and we'll look at this as we get further into the game, but for now, because this is just turn 1, we are going to look at what we can do now. So we drew a 3 marker. We count, due to special rules, that times 2 for this scenario that we're playing in Europe only. So 3 times 2 is 6. We basically have effective value of 6 U.S. entry. That means we can decide to enact one of these actions up to number 6, right? So we have 2 options, 1 and 4. Now, the first one, Chinese-built aircraft, is for Japan and the Pacific. So there's no point in us taking that. But you can see that it says that it is targeted for Japan, JA. 3, that is going to govern whether or not a chit goes into the tension pool from the U.S. entry pool. So you begin to draw these chits. They go into the U.S. entry pool. And then as you take actions, that goes into the tension pool. And it says you must choose this option before China can build any aircraft. So they can't even build any new aircraft. China can't until you pass this. So this is one of those things, like if you're the Chinese player, you kind of need to know this stuff, or else you might accidentally build aircraft. The only other option that we can take right now is to intern the French carrier. And so we would need 4, which we have. It says you may only choose this option if the carrier Bjorn is Vichy controlled and it becomes Free French. But it's not Vichy controlled yet, so there's no point in taking this, or it's not effective to take this. So we're not going to take any U.S. entry option this turn. But as we get to the point in this playthrough where we can pick these, or we want to pick these, I'll do my best to kind of talk to the hows and the whys I'm doing what I'm doing. And I can't, again, say that they're the best decisions as I make them, but you'll at least understand why. But when we get to production here very shortly, that's going to be kind of the major impact on what we can or cannot build as the United States. Early on, it's going to be mostly about naval units. We more or less have the ability to build naval units, and so we'll probably look to do a lot of that in preparation for the war in the Atlantic. So that's as much as I'll really say on this, because I could spend, again, whole videos talking about U.S. entry. I think at a baseline for our purposes here in this playthrough, that's all we need to cover for now. In future videos, as it makes a difference, we'll get there. The only thing I'll say in closing to that is that you can tell that ultimately there is some sort of logic to the political element. This is not just a military simulation game. There are political considerations, again, mostly steered towards how the United States reacts to things. But it is that little bit of grease in the wheels in determining what you want to do. So again, the fact that we didn't want to totally snuff out the U.S. entry chit is important, right? We had to make sure that we didn't lose too many of our U.S. entry chits, or else we'd have none, and we wouldn't be able to take actions. And if that keeps happening, we keep getting into a state where we can't pass U.S. entry options because the Axis isn't doing enough stuff to provoke the United States. That means the United States is going to get in much later, right? That's that element of, do we progress forward? Do we not? Do we invade? Do we not? Is the Soviet Union going to hold back until it's a little safer to do what it wants to do? And if you're playing where the USSR wants to win independently by having, a lot of objective cities or whatever, then yeah, they might have a reason to play it a little differently than what the Allies want. So you get into that sort of thing. Anyway, we're going to move on now to the next part of the intern stage, which is return to base. This is very easy and relatively simple. Basically, the idea is you're going to return ships out at sea to base, or decide if you're going to return them to base. And there's kind of two ways to do this. You either have units return to port from their sea zone, wherever they are, or if you choose to have them stay out there, and I guess this includes air units that are out at sea, air units and naval units at sea. They either go home and land or go to port, or they stay in the sea zone, but they go down one box. So it just has an example over here. We could have everyone in this sea zone go home. The convoys are exempted from this, so the convoys don't have to leave. But we could have all these guys go home, or if they didn't, they would all slide down one box like so. And the reason why you do this, or you might do this, is so that you, even in the beginning of the next turn, already have units out to sea. You're already out there. They're protecting the convoys or whatever you want to do. You're out there first. Sometimes that can be important, especially depending if you're playing with certain optional rules that are like in the presence of the enemy, which means if you're out there first, it's a little bit better. It makes it harder for the enemy to get into higher sea boxes because you're there first. That can really matter. So having those units out there can be very useful. And the other thing is that the con to this is that if those units are still out there but they're down a box, again, depending on your options, it might give that opportunity to the opponent to get their units in a higher box on their move, and then be able to find you easier than you can find them, and that impacts the naval combat. So it is a decision. Do you want to leave some guys out there? Are you going to send them all home? Who do you think is going to have initiative? Who's going to go first? Because, again, first to the sea zone can oftentimes be an advantage. Do you want to send your guys home hoping that they can go first and get back into the high sea zone box? That's really kind of what you want to be thinking about. Now, again, for right now, it doesn't matter a whole lot because we're not doing a whole lot of naval stuff yet, but that will start to become more important. So we need to decide who's going home, right? Now, we can do this in initiative order, very easy to do that. We'll have the just as an example, we'll have the Italians keep their plane out here, and it'll slide down one box, relatively easy. The Germans are going to have their North Sea Fleet go home. Now, when they do this, they'll flip, but we won't really worry about that for a second, because it won't really matter. So they go home. The Commonwealth ships that are out here, and the French, we'll give it over now to the Allies. Do they want to shift down? Right now, they'll say, okay, over here, that's fine. And over on the east side of things, of the Mediterranean, just for the fun of difference, we'll have these guys go to Port Said. They'll return to base. We're just playing with that. It won't really matter because unless the Italians are going to declare war in 1939, it doesn't really make a difference. But just for illustration, I'm going to show the difference, right? Those guys went home. Those guys decided to all stay out at sea, including the French units. These guys over here, they will all slide down a box. Same thing with the guys up here. We'll slide down a box. A little bit at risk here because they're starting to get in the lower boxes. And then what we'll have is the rest of the Scapa Flow fleet all go home. They're all going to go home. They're all going to form up together into their big, Megazord, if you know what that is, fleet. And I'll just leave them up there for now. So everyone's done their return to base. Again, very straightforward. You're just making a decision. Am I leaving guys out here or am I sending them home? And it's a really simple thing to decide what you want to do. Not hard at all. Not hard at all. So that much is done. So then we go on to the next phase, and that is the final reorganization. This is also a very easy phase. So all final reorganization is a resetting of the game units for the next turn. So anything that was flipped or left flipped because they weren't brought back to a face-up position by an HQ or whatever, we'll get to reorg, and we'll reorg for free. So everyone's just getting spun back up for the next one. So that includes the naval units that went home or had to return to base in the middle of the turn and flipped. They will flip back up. Any of the air units that flew missions from before, they will flip face back up. And any of these other units, the garrison, or not the garrisons, the reserves, any other units that flipped, blah, 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 they will all flip back up. Now, there are some optional rules out there for things like, should a unit that's cut out of supply and surrounded be able to reorg? I think I play with the rule that if you are out of supply and surrounded and flipped, you can't flip back up because you're screwed. But the base game, you can, without that option. Not really relevant here, but it might matter for the Soviet Union. So I'm just going to do this off camera very quickly and flip everybody to their face-up positions. It's easy to do, so we'll be right back. Okay, so final reorg is done, and really, again, very simple stuff. There's not much to it. And what I'll sometimes find is, like, you might forget to flip something because you have a face-up unit on top of a face-down unit. And usually when you encounter that when playing, it's like, oops, and you just fix it. And it's usually not really a big deal, right? I don't think anyone should penalize their opponent for forgetting to flip a unit. Just let them flip it, right? It's not a big deal. We all know that they're supposed to be flipped back up. So if you catch it, on the first impulse or the first, couple of impulses, you notice, oops, I forgot to flip this guy. Let them flip it. It's not a big deal, right? That's what I think anyway. But I'm pretty sure I captured everything. It wasn't a whole lot, right? The only guys who are really moving around doing that kind of stuff are the Germans and the British and the French. And we'll look at some interesting things we'll do in the next impulse with our movement and everything to avoid really screwing up our movement capability and stuff. We do have a Senegalese militia that the French are going to need to get their transport down and pick him up and bring him to the continent. So we'll start looking at that in the next turn as well. Okay, so with all of that done, there are two things left to do in the end of turn phase. One is production. The other is the peace phase where we do the actual conquering of Poland and all that good stuff. So nothing too much to worry about there. With the conquer phase, it's actually pretty straightforward for the most part. But production is the monster, and we do have to do these things in order. So technically, yes, we do production. And this is going to be a whole thing, right? This is going to be a whole thing. Production is important, and because we're going to do it for all the factions on the board, which I guess amounts to Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Soviet Union, it's going to take some time. So I think what I'm going to do, because I haven't uploaded a video in a while, I don't want to keep you guys waiting while I do more recording, and basically I'm going to have to do all of that essentially another day at this point, or I'm going to probably only have time to do it another day. We'll cover that, right? So in the next video, we'll do production in the conquest phase. Hopefully, will be a shorter video, but again, really need to talk through how everything's getting to everywhere and all that good fun stuff. So we'll see you in the next one, guys. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. Again, I apologize for the delay in getting this video to you, but we will get through that next video here hopefully very soon. We won't have to wait too long on that. And then we'll be off to turn 2. And again, things should speed up more as we go, because I won't re-explain basic mechanics as we go unless there's something really special to point out, which will mean I won't be starting and stopping the camera all the time and talking about every little thing. We should be able to move much more swiftly. And plus, these next couple of turns are going to be winter turns. Won't be as much going on there. So we'll be able to skip past a lot of that stuff. We'll just be able to play through and record less. You guys will see things happen a little more quickly on your end without, 1 month taking, 3 videos to to display. So, okay, guys, see you in the next one. Take care. Keep on gaming.